something that I think is a really important thing to use when you're training your dog, and which can be of wonderful use for dogs that are reactive or any other kind of dog, is using anticipation. So one of the things that happens when we're doing positive reinforcement training, or for that matter, even compulsive training, is that the consequence to the behavior happens immediately after the behavior itself. So if you're doing clicker training, the click means the treat is coming, right? If you use marker words, yes means the treat is coming. But we forget how important anticipation is. Anticipation is more important than any other kind of reinforcement because it is longer lasting, right? So if I'm walking with my dogs and they see something that is really interesting, like buzzards, or something that's just really, they're very interested in, I might actually say their names, get a head snap, and then I'll go, good dogs. And I'll wait for 10, 15 seconds before I give them a treat. So the whole time, and I may not even have the treat out, the whole time they're thinking, oh good, I'm going to get something, I'm going to get something, I'm going to get something. Well, when you're working with reactive dogs, you're probably going to have to use anticipation. Because if you try to, so here's a really good example. So you're going to walk past somebody, and that person, and you have a reactive dog. What the tendency is to as soon as you see the other dog, to give your dog a treat. And you know what happens after that, right? As soon as you do that, they look back at the dog. As soon as you do that. So what in the very beginning, when we were working on this stuff, we would have, and I know people still do this, you do treat, 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 all the way past the other dog. Anybody heard of that? It just kind of, or another thing that people did was they would get these squeezy things, like with a treat, and just give the dog a squeezy thing all the way past the dog. And what is that doing? You're distracting the dog. You're doing GPS learning, aren't you? Because the dog is not thinking about what they're going past. They are actually just following the lure. You've got a lure that's going on and on and on and on and on. So, I don't know. Many years ago, I thought, well, I never liked the tube. It just felt too much like feeding a baby or something. I don't know. I just didn't like it. And so what I thought was, well, maybe a treat in the beginning, a treat at the middle when you're walking past another dog, and a treat at the end. And so for years, that's what I would say. Okay, you first of all, you offer the treat. You say, I see another dog, they see another dog, you have the treat here, you're going to earn this treat. We're going to go on a little bit. I want you to anticipate the fact that you're going to get this treat. So you get a little bit closer, you get a treat, and you immediately have another treat out. And that might mean that you have the treats in your hand. And so they know that one, they just got that one, now we're going to earn another one really fast, but you have to think about it. So here's your anticipation again. You're going to think about it, it's going to happen, and then they get another one, and then they finally get the one at the end. And the same thing happens there. You're always using anticipation. Well, what I decided after a while was I didn't need the first one. Because as soon as you take it out, you've got the dog's attention on you. And so, what I would then do is the middle one and the end one. And I still do that, but now I've really almost skipping the middle one, and we're working on anticipation all the way to the end. And then when you get past the other dog, then you actually have them do a piece of obedience, which is usually a sit. So now we're not even reinforcing walking past the other dog. You're reinforcing the sit at the end of the behavior, or at the end of the whole episode. So what happens then is that you can do this past anything. You can do this past a tree if you want to. You can go, they see the tree, you go good boy, good girl, whatever. You go all the way past, you have to do a sit, and then you do a tree. And I found this, I'm still certainly not above or beyond using 3 treats or even a whole bunch of treats if I really need them. But I did find that long haul, this wait to the end of the behavior, and while they're finishing the behavior up, that's when you reinforce. What happens is the dog starts thinking ahead. And then they start identifying, looking at the other dog that they're going to be reactive to. They start identifying that with looking at you and getting a treat, instead of just this whole trying to do this thing. So again, everything's fair game when you're working with reactive dogs. If you've got a dog that goes ballistic, there's an awful lot of stuff that you can do. But this way, using anticipation is something that I found to be really successful in working with the dogs that I've been working with over the last 2-3 years, I think.
More so than, for instance, like if you're surprised, sometimes when I'm surprised by another dog,
That I can't hear you. Okay.
Sometimes when I'm surprised, I would just like find it and I'll just toss a whole bunch of treats because it's so like.
Oh, Find It is always
So,
wonderful.
as
Find It
opposed
is
to
great.
that.
Yeah, Find It is definitely a highly distractible thing, and they also can learn and that's also using anticipation, isn't it? That's what Find It uses. You say Find It, and the dog's like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy,
So
right?
would you use that to pass another dog?
Oh, yeah.
Find it for that?
Absolutely. And I use for her, well, with our Aussie, I used to do this a lot. He was he would charge ahead and go boo at other dogs. And then he'd go, I'm a really happy, nice dog. But it just was not, it wasn't very nice on the other dogs because he'd go racing ahead. So what we would do with him is when we saw the other dog, we'd go boo, great name, Boo, right? And just flip a treat behind us. And so he'd go shooting back behind us. And then he'd start coming up to go after the dog again, like boop, and he'd back there again. And I use it on Aspen too. So I want them behind me doing a Find It. So I use Find It all the time. They are a real go-to thing. But from the point of view of anticipation, the more you can use. I'm anticipating you walking right into that right now. The more you use anticipation, I think the more likely you are to keep your dog with you. Because as soon as they get that treat, they forget all about it and they go to the next thing. So you really want them to think about what they're going to be getting.
From the set sequence that you were just going through, you use now just the treat at the end after they do something like the sit, so it's they know you have the treat before.
Oh, they know it, yeah.
But they don't get a treat then and a treat at the end.
No, not at this, but I mean,
That makes sense.
that is certainly because what you don't want is you don't want that treat, and then as soon as you get a treat, they immediately look at the next thing. So that's kind of why I did that, is because once they get that treat, you have to then get their attention back again really fast, and sometimes it's harder to do that. Yeah.
Do you say anything as you're passing? Are you talking to them? Or are you saying, wait, or anything like that? Or are you just...
Usually I'm just kind of encouraging them. You're such a good dog. You really are a good dog. I really like this. That kind of thing. Other than that, I'm not sure that they would even be hearing things. They may not. But certainly if you have a dog that loves the sound of your voice, I would absolutely do it. That's the other thing that's really important when you're working with reactive dogs too, is that every dog is different. So if one dog does very well with consistent verbal reminder, I think that's great. And other dogs don't care about it one way or the other. Knowing your own dog is a really important consideration. So, just think about what anticipation does for you or does for your dog. When you're going to get ready, you come home from work and they think they're going to go for a walk. Ta-da, 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 ta-da. Oh, this is really cool, this is cool, this is cool. And then you go for a walk and they're like, okay. But the anticipation of it is really, really nice. So they like that anticipation. In fact, I think some dogs like the anticipatory part way more than they like the actual thing, which is probably true of us too. As soon as you get something from Amazon, you want something else.
You're supposed to, the best part of vacation is supposed to be the anticipation of it. When people were surveyed, they had more fun anticipating their
Oh,
vacation
yeah.
than actually being.
Yeah, and I think it is, but it's the pleasure part of the brain. And that is, as opposed to satiation. Cooking is often more fun than eating. Those things are the anticipation, and actually the prey drive is built on anticipation, because an animal does not have to be hungry to use his prey drive. In fact, he shouldn't be hungry. So the prey drive is actually that fun part of, oh goody, it's great to chase a cat. Not the, I'm going to eat the cat afterwards. It's just the chasing part that's fun. So that's one of the reasons why dogs often don't follow through, because that's the fun part that's over with. But dinner. As soon as you start, you actually make a move towards something that has anything to do with dinner. It's like, oh boy. I don't know about your dogs, but Aspen and Flocka both pick up toys and start throwing them all over the place when it looks like dinner is in the offing somewhere. Yeah, just like, oh my God, this is so much, this is so great. And another thing is, speaking of prey drive, if you watch your dogs hunting, what is their tail doing? It's like, whoa, oh boy. And, I thought for the longest time, I thought that was a signal to other dogs that you're hunting, but I think it's just because they're having a really good time.
They do that for scenting too.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, because it's so much fun to do that. And yes, it could be a signal to other dogs, but I think that's a secondary thing. I think that the fact is that they're enjoying themselves. And so if you see another dog and now you're getting them to be anticipatory of something that's going to come at the end of the other dog, hey, that's good, isn't it? So as long as they're anticipating getting something from you and not beating up on the other dog, that probably would not be a good thing. So the whining, dogs a lot of times will whine right before anything good. And you will see an awful lot of reactive dogs that whine like crazy before they see another dog. And they get that whole frustration thing. So it is, using it for our own ends, I think is really important. And I think that people forget that because we keep on thinking in terms of behavior and reward. And part of the reward is the anticipation. So it is really important to remember that habit is memory. And that if without habit, you don't have memory. So there's an actual physiological process that occurs when a habit or memory is formed. So first of all, the behavior, they start the behavior. And then the dog has to learn the behavior, so you have to teach it. Then you have to practice it. Then, and this is the hard part, the dog has to retrieve the memory when you need them to retrieve the memory. So now you've worked on a come-for, which is a really tiny little come. You've worked on that over and over and over and over again. And so the dog really gets it, and you've worked at it in the house, and then you've worked on it outside. Now what happens is as soon as you see another dog and you try it, that they can't retrieve the memory. Why can't they retrieve the memory? Well, because they are no longer in a state of mind that has access to that part of their brain. So you actually, when you're teaching particularly reactive dogs, but all dogs to a certain extent, we have to put them in a situation where the habit becomes the behavior itself becomes a habit, goes into the reflexive part of the brain, goes out of the conscious brain into the reflexive or the unconscious brain, so that when you say when you say come or whatever your term is for this, they go into it without thinking about it. And I think that's a really hard thing for clients to get. That it's not just you're teaching the dog the behavior, it's that the behavior has to become as automatic as putting your foot on the brake. Because if we had to think about putting our foot on the brake, we would all be getting into crashes every day, right? So, well, I would anyway, maybe you guys wouldn't, I don't know. But, so that's a really important consideration, is that has to become a gut memory. Markers, telling the dog when they're doing something right, it's not just a tool that we use, it's really important because a marker actually will imprint on the brain. So if you're saying yes, or I use good more than I use yes. And most clients think good dog, right? They think that it's an approval situation, but it's not. And I think when I learned about this more than anything else is when I realized that they were using clicker training for teaching kids gymnastics. You heard about that? I mean, it's really, so what would happen is, the kids would have to do this arc when they're flying in the air, essentially. And they started to use a clicker when they hit the zenith, when they hit the point at which the arc should start going down. And they found that the kids could do it like 40% better after just a few marks, which is absolutely astounding. So marker words are extremely important. Now they're not important for sit, because sit is not a moving behavior. So people are always going, sit, yes! No, you don't need to do that. The dog has just done it, it's fine. But it's really important for turn and look at me. It's really important for, flip and turn to do a come. It's actually important if you're going to do a heel and you want the dog right here, if you want them here. If you don't, then it's not important. So it's important on things that are very specific behaviors in the middle of a motion. Make sense? So now you get the whole thing. You're trying to work with a reactive dog who's not in his right mind, and you're trying to teach him things, and so he's going to have that muscle memory, so he'll be able to do what you want him to do when you want him to do it. And no wonder it's hard to work with reactive dogs. You know, you're working with a person who's in a state of hysteria all the time, or a dog that's in a state of hysteria. So most people tend to think that dogs have learned much more than they've learned in a very brief period of time. We all know that people don't practice with their dogs when they're taking a weekly class. They usually practice maybe the day before or the day of the class. And some people are really good about practicing every day, but if you practice every day, you're actually going to be able to retrieve the memory. So realizing that there's two parts of training, there's acquisition and maintenance is really important. Acquisition is when the dog is learning. Maintenance is when the dog has learned it. And when the dog has learned it, then you can expect it to actually happen. Maintenance, it takes a long time to occur. Much longer time. Okay, so is he going to text you when he's arrived, or? So behavior modification choices for reactive dogs. Classical condition. This is the dog experiences something. This is like desensitization and counter conditioning. So you create an association between the bad thing and the good thing. This is what many people use, almost exclusively, is desensitization and counter conditioning. So if you are, is that him?
That's my daughter.
Oh, that's your daughter. Okay. So why don't we, because we're just starting on this, why don't we stop here, come back to this afterwards, because this is really important. Most of these different kinds of trainings are really important. Okay, so everybody stay seated, and we are going to do some stuff.